Okay, we're back and I have applied my design. I will never claim to be an expert painter because I've never done grapes before. I'm not sure how easy they are, but I'm okay with how it looks, so that's what's important. So now on this, I'm just going to use the sponge. It's wet. It doesn't have a bunch of other goop on it. It's clean. And I didn't have to take that off because it's underglaze. It's not a big deal. I'm just kind of cleaning the piece up a little bit. Just keep in mind that, if you do get the glaze in the, where you don't want it or the underglaze, you have to really go over it more than once to make sure that you've gotten it off that section. See, and then it smears a little bit, so that's not perfect either. But anyway, some of you will have cups with flat bottoms or bottoms that are really too shallow to put any color in there. So, which the color would be with the underglaze, and allegedly the underglaze doesn't stick to the shelf, so, or this type doesn't. I've never had any problems with it in the past, but it might be best not to test it. So as you were using your underglazes and your glazes, you may have had to stir them or shake them up. Make sure the lid's tight, of course. And now that my design with my underglaze is dry, if you remember, you traced, actually, look at that. Oh no. It's dry, so, it covered up the pencil marks. The pencil marks are basically going to burn off in the kiln. There are some artistic forms where they use, certain things to create designs that burn off in the kiln, which is kind of interesting. But anyway, the important part when you're glazing over something that you've used underglaze on, okay, that has not been fired in between, like this piece, right? Because I put the underglaze on, and now this is the glaze, which will, this particular type of clear glaze will dry pink, so you know where it is, but it will fire clear, so, we're good on that. And it'll take at least 2 coats of glaze, and you want it, I usually put my glaze on the inside first. And you just want to make sure it's well coated, okay? And you don't want any big drips, but you don't dry brush it to the point where there isn't anything left, okay? So typically with glazes, I put on 3 coats. With the clear coat, sometimes you can get by with just 1. So, do your 2 or 3 coats on the inside. If you miss a spot, it's not a big deal. But just remember, stay away from this section here. Oh, I'm off camera. Don't put any on this section here because that will stick to the shelf and you'll have a broken cup and I'll have a damaged shelf. So we don't want to do that. But just give it some running room here. Remember, no glaze here, no glaze here. And if you have a flat bottom, just don't put any glaze on the bottom, okay? But make sure you leave just a little bit of an edge, about the width of a paintbrush, okay? So when you're glazing over the design the first time, this is coat number 1, just gently dab it. Just gently dab it. Because if I'm aggressive with it like I was on the inside of the cup, it will lift the underglaze. And we don't want that because then we'll have a smeared effect, which will not look nice, okay? So you just dab it. And this is most important for the first layer of glaze going over the design. And usually what I do is I will apply the clear glaze over the underglaze first, okay? Now, I didn't decorate both sides. I could, but I don't want to. So, I just dab over that, and that way I know that I have secured the underglaze in there, and then you let it totally dry, it turns that lighter, this one turns that lighter pink. But, you know, when it's totally dry, you should be able to, you know, gently touch it with your finger, and it comes off as a residue that's kind of like chalk. Now, you don't want to rub too hard or you're going to have to put more glaze on. But just keep in mind that you don't want any big runny drips, and this just needs to dry completely in between. And once you have all of your layers on here, then it'll be ready to go. And what you'll do is at the very end, when you're completely done, you'll wash out your sponge and you'll clean off that bottom rim. You can kind of guess, you know, how much pressure to apply, and that should come right off. And you can kind of use that ridge as a guide for the cups that have a noticeable ridge right there, and it should come right off. So we'll pretend that I did my 3 coats all the way around, just like you saw me do on the inside. And if you have any small sections that need a little bit of glaze and you can't get to it from the fan brush with the fan brush, then you can take your skinny paintbrush and just kind of fill in, okay? So don't worry if there's a little spot that you miss. You know, just try to get it at least once. The important part is to keep that rim clean so that when it fires in the kiln, it doesn't run down. So if we'll say that I have my 3 coats, you know, 2 at the very least, inside and out, and once that's done, this will be ready to be fired. And so at this point, once it's all done, you just kind of handle it gently because it will chip off, and then you'll have to reapply glaze to that. So whenever I get these cups back, I will gingerly bring them home so they don't get chipped. And if I see glaze missing, I'll put it back on. But like I said, with the clear glaze, it's not as crucial. You know, sometimes with your colored glazes, if there's a chip, it's really obvious and it looks bad. So anyway, we'll say that I have my 3 coats on here. You know, the next coat that I put over the underglaze, you know, I can put on quickly like I did here. You know, it's a pretty fast process. It just takes a few minutes to dry in between, but each layer of glaze takes a little bit longer to dry. So do at least 2 layers of glaze, and you can do 3. Just, you know, make sure it's not gloppy, because that could create a problem during the firing. And that's it. Just wash everything out well so that the brushes can be used and reused several times. Try not to, you know, make sure that after you're done with your underglazes, you know, before you switch colors or before you switch it to a glaze, just make sure it's rinsed out really well, because you don't want to cross-contaminate, you know, the underglaze with the glaze or, you know, other things. So just keep that in mind, because weird things happen sometimes, and you just have to be careful not to do that. And then, of course, you know, fasten everything down tightly with the lids on them, because these dry out just like paint. But when you first open them up, you may have to stir them up. And that's it. Thanks. Good luck and have fun.